Sometimes sweetener is worse and sometimes sugar is worse, and sometimes neither are the problem. The thing is that there are no catch-all rules. Often people want to know what is the healthiest in specific situations. One of the big ones is fizzy drinks. Should I be drinking full fat Coke or should I go for the zero sugar alternative? The second is with protein. Is it better to have protein even if it has some sugar or some sweetener in it, or better not to have anything at all? And then finally is, when I am going to have something sugary, a naughty treat, is it better to have the normal version or a sweetened alternative? So we'll cover these three, but also along the way bust some myths around weight gain, blood sugar control, cancer, and the microbiome along the way. But as always, before we start, context matters. Why are you trying to do this? Are you trying to lose weight, improve your blood sugar control? Are you trying to satisfy a sweet craving? Are we trying to hit our protein goals? Because the answer changes depending on the goal. So let's look at what you should do with sweetened beverages. If you drink fizzy drinks such as full fat Coke, there is a net positive to changing from the full sugar version to a zero sugar alternative. However, it is nuanced, because what will happen in the real world is that people will get that sweetness without the actual satisfaction, so they will seek the calories elsewhere. However, those calories are usually better and more nutritious than just the sugar that is in the liquid. So therefore, it is not necessarily going to contribute to losing weight, but what it will do is improve metabolic health for the reasons that I just said. Because it's important to understand what we mean by sweeteners, because they're not just one thing. Sweeteners are compounds that either contain virtually no calories or are so intensely sweet that you need a tiny amount to match the sweetness of sugar, so that the calorie content is basically zero. There are artificial sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, and saccharin, sugar alcohols like xylitol and erythritol, and the newer options like stevia, monk fruit, and allulose. As you can see from this table, they differ massively in sweetness, calories, and how much you need to match sugar. So blanket statements about sweeteners being good or bad are usually oversimplified. So here's the thing. If people swapped regular Coke for Diet Coke, weight usually doesn't change much. However, if they swap the regular Coke or even the Diet Coke for soda water, it would. Why? Because soda water not only removes the calories, it also removes the sweetness, so that you're not trying to compensate later and eventually taking on more calories. So here's the most important takeaway. If you have a sweetened zero sugar drink, your body is thinking that it's getting the sweetness without the actual satisfaction of the sugar, so it will usually go and compensate by getting those calories somewhere else to make up for it. So while we're at it, let's bust a few myths. The first is that diet drinks cause weight gain. Well, that's actually not true. It comes from observational studies. What's more likely is that people already gaining weight choose diet drinks. That means that the two are correlated, that diet drinks go hand in hand with weight gain, but not necessarily causal. So diet drinks don't necessarily cause weight gain. They're two very different things. The next myth is that sweeteners destroy your microbiome. Some sweeteners do alter the microbiome, but what matters more is firstly how much of the sweetener you're having and what your diet is like around all of that. The best thing you can do for your microbiome is eating a varied, fiber-rich diet. So diet drinks plus a fiber-rich whole food diet is very different from diet drinks plus ultra-processed food all day. The next myth is that sweeteners improve blood sugar. In fact, actually, glycemic control is worse amongst those taking sugar substitute drinks versus those taking just soda water. So if you don't already have diet drinks in your rotation, then don't start now. Final myth is that artificial sweeteners cause cancer. There is no credible evidence of increased cancer risk at human doses. Animal studies use extreme amounts and whopping doses, and as always, the dose makes the poison. So the next situation patients ask me about is what to do around protein and sweetened protein products. Now, as you'll have heard me say in this video many times, protein is the most important macronutrient, and in an ideal world, I would encourage people to get it from real food. So meat, fish, high protein vegetable sources as well, but often practically that isn't feasible for a lot of people. So we have to find our protein source from an alternative, a convenient source. And really that leaves you with two options, which are the dehydrated, salty, kind of jerky type protein alternatives. And you do have to consider all of the preservative profile that's in those. But the second option is a sweetened protein product. So that could be a shake or, for example, a protein bar. Now, the thing to bear in mind is that protein is a really difficult substance to work with, and without some sort of flavoring, tastes absolutely awful. So the trade-off between a small amount of sweetener or sugar to ensure that we get the protein in and hit our protein target versus not having it is usually a net positive. Timing also matters, because most people people are asking this question in the context of when they take it after training. Now, remember, if you've ever done a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, you'll see that you are most insulin sensitive immediately in the hour after exercising. So that is the time that you can tolerate carbs and sugar the most. And then the final one is my favorite, about naughty treats. So if we're having something sweet, this is why it's important to go back to the goal. We are doing this not because there's any nutritional benefit. We are doing this to satisfy a sweet craving. Now, people often feel guilty around these things, but to put your mind at ease, actually, there are some studies out there that show that those people who have the occasional sweet treats, so like 2 or 3 a month, are actually happier and therefore, as a consequence, healthier when they have the occasional time where they let themselves go. But like we said before, artificial sweeteners don't fully satisfy that craving, so they often leave you wanting and taking more, and sometimes consuming more calories as a consequence. That's because sugar activates a nutrient sensor in the gut called SGLT1, which signals the brain to stop. However, most artificial sweeteners don't do that. So that's why in this specific situation, if you really don't want the sugary dessert, fruit will work well, but actually a smaller portion of the real thing will beat a large low sugar dessert. There is one exception, which is a slightly special sweetener called allulose, which does trigger that SGLT1 receptor and cause that satisfaction. So that is one that is a great alternative option to cook with. However, it doesn't store very well, so that's why you won't see it in many packaged goods. So as always, I like to leave you with a framework. Remember, the real scenario isn't is sugar or sweetener worse, it's what is the situation in which I'm using it and what's the best option to go for. Drinks, switching from sugar to diet versions can help, but ultimately unsweetened is the best long-term option. When it comes to protein, getting it in is the priority, so sweeteners usually make sense. And when it comes to naughty treats or dessert, fruit or a small portion of the real thing beats the substitutes. So think of progression rather than perfection. If you could go from sugar to the sweetener to then the no sweetened version at all, that's the best way. But if you want to understand how this all fits into a bigger context of your diet and how to really build a diet that's right for you, check out this video here. Otherwise, follow the channel for more really useful advice on how to be your healthiest. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.